So here's the thing about the Galactic Military Academy's gravity training facility. It has a reputation. The kind of reputation that makes seasoned cadets break out in cold sweats and check their life insurance policies. Station Kronos, where this particular chamber of horrors is located, has a 40% dropout rate before cadets even finish their first semester. And about 90% of those dropouts happen in one specific room. Chamber 7, the gravity gym. Commander Vrel stood at the front of said chamber, his scales gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights, clipboard clutched in his clawed hands like a holy scripture. Vrel was a Saurian, which meant he looked like what would happen if you gave a velociraptor a military commission and an insufferable superiority complex. He'd been running this program for 12 cycles, and he took personal pride in his meticulously organized torture sessions. Sorry, training sessions. Attention cadets, Vrel announced, his voice carrying that special quality of someone who enjoys other people's suffering just a little too much. Today you will undergo the threshold test. This will determine your capacity for high-gravity combat operations. Statistics show that most species reach their biological limits between 1.6 and 1.8 times standard gravity. The Academy record stands at 2.3 G, achieved by Cadet Thorax of the Krogthan Empire, who subsequently required 3 weeks of medical intervention and now works in accounting. The assembled cadets, a rainbow of alien biology, shifted nervously. There was Keegs, a gelatinous Blorbian who was already looking a bit droopy. Next to him stood Crate, a insectoid chitin whose antennae were twitching with barely concealed anxiety. A few Zentari floated nearby, their crystalline bodies refracting the light in patterns that probably spelled out various prayers to their gods. This test will push you to your absolute limits, Vrel continued, warming to his subject. It will reveal whether you have the fortitude to serve in the Galactic Defense Corps, or whether you should perhaps consider a career in botanical studies or food service. Now, are there any questions before we begin? That's when the door whooshed open. Jake Thompson strolled in like he was showing up to a casual barbecue, not a military evaluation that regularly sent people to the hospital. He was medium height for a human, with the kind of build that suggested he was familiar with physical activity but wasn't obnoxious about it. He wore the standard-issue training gear, and he was eating what appeared to be some kind of wrapped food item, chewing casually. Sorry I'm late, Jake said, his mouth half full. The cafeteria had these protein bars, and I needed to grab a few for after. You know how it is. Every eye, stalk, and optical sensor in the room swiveled toward him. Vrel's nictitating membranes blinked twice. You are Cadet Thompson. Human. From Earth. That's me, Jake confirmed, taking another bite. This is the gravity thing, right? Cool, cool. Should be fun. Fun. The human said it should be fun. Vrel consulted his datapad with the air of someone already regretting their life choices. You are late, Cadet Thompson. Yeah, like I said, protein bars. These things are actually pretty good. Want one? Jake held out a wrapped bar toward Vrel. The commander's scales rippled in what might have been indignation. I do not want your primitive nutrient supplement. I want you to take your position with the other cadets immediately. Your tardiness has been noted in your permanent record. Noted in my permanent record, Jake repeated with a grin, moving to join the group. Man, that takes me back to high school. Good times. Chicks oozed slightly away from Jake as he approached. The human's reputation had preceded him. Humans were new to the galactic community, and the rumors about their death world were already legendary. Chicks had heard they came from a planet with weather that actively tried to kill them, predators everywhere, and they'd spent thousands of years fighting each other because they apparently got bored without enemies. All right, Vrel said, his tone suggesting he was already done with this day and it had barely started. Everyone into the chamber. We begin in 2 minutes. I suggest you make peace with your deities of choice. The cadets filed into Chamber 7, a circular room about 30 meters across with padding on the walls and what looked like entirely too much medical equipment standing by. Jake finished his protein bar, tossed the wrapper in a disposal unit, and cracked his knuckles. So, he said to Crate, who was standing next to him looking like he was about to face a firing squad. First time? Crate's antennae drooped. Yes, I am terrified. You'll be fine, Jake said cheerfully. I mean, probably. What's the worst that could happen? From the control booth, Vrel's voice crackled, through the speakers. That, Cadet Thompson, is precisely the kind of attitude that results in medical emergencies. Please refrain from encouraging false confidence in your fellow cadets. Jake gave the control booth a thumbs up, which meant nothing to most species present, but seemed to irritate Vrel further. "Initiating gravity increase," Vrel announced. "May your ancestors guide you." And just like that, the fun began. The gravity plating hummed to life with a sound like reality clearing its throat. It started subtle, 1.1 G, barely noticeable to most species, just enough to make you aware that something had changed. Like putting on a slightly too heavy backpack. "We will increase in 0.1 increments every 30 seconds. Vrel's voice announced through the speakers, dripping with the kind of clinical detachment that suggested he was already writing dropout reports in his head. "Your biometric monitors will alert us if you approach dangerous stress levels. There is no shame in signaling for extraction. There is, however, significant shame in passing out and requiring emergency medical intervention because you were too prideful to admit defeat." 1.2 G hit, and Kiex made a sound like a deflating balloon. His gelatinous form was already starting to flatten, spreading out like someone had dropped a very anxious pudding. "Holding steady," Jake said to no one in particular, bouncing slightly on his feet like a boxer warming up. "Nice." 1.3 G. Crate's legs were trembling now, and several of the Zentari had stopped floating, settling onto the floor with crystalline clinks. The weight was real now. Every movement required more effort. Every breath felt like it was pulling against resistance. 1.4 G. 2 cadets signaled for extraction, their biometric alarms shrieking. The gravity field flickered around them as they were pulled into safe zones, looking relieved and ashamed in equal measure. Jake rolled his shoulders. Getting interesting now. Vrel leaned forward in the control booth, studying his monitors with the intensity of someone watching a sporting event they'd bet heavily on. The human's readings were completely normal. Heart rate slightly elevated, but well within acceptable parameters. No strain markers. No stress hormones spiking. It was like he was standing in regular gravity. "Pip," Vrel said to his assistant, a nervous Quarlon engineer with 4 arms and too many eyes. "Are you certain the human's monitor is functioning correctly?" Pip checked his console, 2 hands flying over controls while the other 2 wrung together anxiously. "Yes, Commander." Triple-checked before the session. "His readings are accurate." "Impossible," Vrel muttered. "He must have cybernetic enhancements. Check the scans." "Already did, sir. He's completely organic. Not even a dental filling." 1.5 G hit like a truck made of other trucks. Chix was now completely flat, resembling a very stressed pancake with eyes. Half the remaining cadets were on their knees, and the other half looked like they wanted to be. Breathing was hard work now. Existing was hard work. Jake did a few experimental squats. "Oh yeah, feeling it now. This is good stuff." "Is he malfunctioning?" Pip asked, watching the human with all 7 of his eyes. "Do humans malfunction?" "I genuinely do not know," Vrel admitted. 1.6 G. 3 more cadets tapped out, their signals coming in rapid succession. One of them was crying, though in their species that manifested as color-changing bioluminescence that spelled out various expressions of regret and pain. 1.7 G. Crate collapsed, his chitinous frame cracking under the pressure. Medical drones swooped in immediately, extracting him to the safe zone where he lay panting, looking like he'd just survived a war. 1.8 G. This was it. This was where most species hit their wall. The point where biology said absolutely not, and the body started shutting down non-essential functions to keep the essential ones running. Only 5 cadets remained standing, and standing was a generous description. They were more accurately refusing to fall despite gravity's very insistent suggestions. And then there was Jake, who was doing neck rolls. "Commander," one of the medical monitoring staff called out, her tentacles quivering as she checked her screens. "The human's vitals are still completely normal. He's barely elevated above his resting baseline." 2.0 G hit like the fist of an angry god. The remaining alien cadets dropped like someone had cut their strings. Only Jake remained standing. He looked around at the fallen cadets with something like concern. "Hey, is everyone okay?" he called out. "Medical teams extract all cadets except the human," Vrel barked into his comm system. The command was more panicked than he'd intended, but he was well past maintaining his composure. The gravity field shimmered as safe. Zones appeared around each fallen cadet, pulling them to safety. Within 30 seconds, Jake stood alone in Chamber 7. "So," Jake called up to the control booth. "Was that it? Is the test over?" Vrel's clawed hand hovered over the control panel. Every instinct he had, every protocol he'd memorized, every shred of common sense screamed at him to stop. They were already at 2G. The chamber was rated to 2.5, And that rating came with approximately 17 safety warnings and a waiver that required 3 separate signatures. But his ego, that treacherous thing, whispered differently. Increasing to 2.2 G, Vrel announced. Jake nodded appreciatively. There we go. 2.2 G. The pressure was immense now. The air itself felt heavier. The lights seemed dimmer, as if the increased gravity was somehow pulling the photons down. Jake's breathing was deeper now, more deliberate, but he was still standing upright without visible strain. 2.4 G, Vrel said, his voice tight. Jake bent down and touched his toes, stretching. Ooh, feeling that in the hamstrings. 2.5 G, Vrel practically whispered. Maximum chamber capacity. The human stood in the center of Chamber 7, in gravity that would turn most species into biological smears. And he looked mildly inconvenienced, like he was waiting for a slow elevator, like his food order was taking too long, like this was the boring part before the real thing started. And then Jake Thompson did something that would haunt Commander Vrel's dreams for the rest of his military career. He dropped into a push-up position and started counting. 1, 2, 3. Pip's hands were shaking so badly he could barely operate his console. Commander, his heart rate is elevated now, but still within normal exercise parameters for his species. 4, 5, 6. This is impossible, Vrel said flatly. Physics does not work this way. Biology does not work this way. 7, 8, 9. Commander, one of the medical staff said, her voice small. Should we stop him? 10, 11, 12. I do not think, Vrel said slowly, that we could stop him if we tried. Jake hit 20 push-ups, then 30. At 40, he switched to one-armed push-ups, alternating sides. At 50, he popped back up to his feet, bouncing on his toes. Hey, Jake called up to the control booth, his voice slightly strained but still fundamentally cheerful. Is this thing working right? Because I was expecting more resistance. When does the actual training start? In the control booth, something in Commander Vrel broke. It might have been his pride. It might have been his understanding of physics. It might have been his sanity. Probably all three. There are moments in every military officer's career that define them. Moments of triumph, of courage under fire, of brilliant tactical decisions that get written into textbooks. Commander Vrel had always imagined he'd have one of those moments eventually. This was not that moment. This was the moment where he stared at a human doing jumping jacks in 2.5 G gravity and questioned every life choice that had led him to this exact point in space and time. 48, 49, 50, Jake counted, finishing his set with a flourish. He wasn't even breathing that hard, maybe slightly more winded than someone who jogged up a flight of stairs. Seriously though, is the calibration off or something? My gym back on the station has better resistance than this. Pip was frantically running diagnostics, all 4 hands dancing across multiple consoles simultaneously, his eyes darting between screens so fast it looked like he was having a seizure. All systems functioning within normal parameters, Commander. Gravity plating is operating at exactly 2.5 G. The calibration was checked this morning, and yesterday, and the day before. I check it obsessively because I have anxiety. Check it again. Vrel said, his voice hollow. Already am, sir. For the 3rd time. Still perfect. The chamber is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The human is just not doing what he's supposed to do. Down in the chamber, Jake had started doing lunges, alternating legs, in 2.5 times Earth's gravity, which was already higher than most species' homeworlds to begin with. You know what this feels like? Jake called up conversationally, like he was chatting with friends at a coffee shop. Remember when I mentioned the gym? We've got this thing called a weight vest. You strap extra mass to your body to make exercises harder. This is like a really good weight vest. Actually, it's more evenly distributed than a vest. Pretty clever design, honestly. One of the medical monitors, a Vexlian named Dr. Morse, tentatively raised a manipulator appendage. Commander, I feel I should mention that the human appears to be enjoying himself. I can see that, Doctor, Vrel said through clenched teeth. I have functioning optical organs. Right, yes, of course, sir. It's just that in my 15 years of monitoring this facility, I have never seen anyone enjoy themselves. I have seen crying, I have seen begging, I have seen existential crises, I have seen a cadet try to gnaw through their own arm to escape. But enjoyment, that is new. Jake had moved on to burpees now. For those unfamiliar with human exercise torture, a burpee is when you drop to the ground, do a push-up, jump back to your feet, and leap into the air. Then repeat this nightmare until you either achieve fitness or achieve death. Jake was doing them in 2.5G like it was a fun little warm-up. "Commander," Pip said quietly, his voice taking on the tone of someone about to deliver very bad news. "I have an idea, but you are not going to like it." "I have not liked anything about the last 10 minutes, Pip. Continue. What if we increase the gravity beyond rated capacity? Every head, sensor array, and visual appendage in the control booth swiveled toward Pip. That is against 17 separate regulations, Vrel said slowly. The chamber is not designed to exceed 2.5G. The structural integrity fields might fail. The gravity plating could overload. We could tear a hole in space-time, or something equally catastrophic that engineering explained to me once, but I was not paying attention because it seemed theoretical. "Yes, sir. All true, sir," Pip said, his voice getting higher with nerves. "But consider this. We are already well beyond the theoretical possible. That human down there has invalidated every assumption we had about biological limitations. What is one more regulation violation at this point? Also, and I cannot stress this enough, I really want to know what happens." Vrel looked down at Chamber 7, where Jake had finished his burpees and was now doing something that looked like a horizontal running motion while supporting his weight on his hands. Humans called them mountain climbers. Apparently because Earth had mountains and humans had decided the reasonable response to mountains was to climb them, then simulate climbing them indoors for recreation. "How high could we push it?" Vrel asked, surprising himself. Pip's eyes brightened with the manic gleam of an engineer who'd just been given permission to push boundaries. "Theoretically, with some creative rerouting of power from non-essential systems and maybe praying to several deities, 3.5, maybe 4G, for short periods, before things start melting or imploding. Things melting or imploding seem suboptimal." "Oh, absolutely, sir. Very suboptimal, but scientifically fascinating." Vrel looked at his career, his reputation, his carefully maintained service record, and made a decision. Later, he would blame temporary insanity. Or that protein bar the human had offered him, even though he hadn't eaten it. Passive protein bar exposure. That was a thing, probably. "Do it," Vrel said. "Increase to 3G gradually, and if anything starts melting or imploding, we stop immediately and we never speak of this again." "Yes, sir," Pip said, and there was altogether too much enthusiasm in his voice. "Attention, Cadet Thompson," Vrel announced through the speakers, trying to sound official rather than unhinged. "We are implementing an extended evaluation protocol. The gravity will continue to increase. Alert us immediately if you experience any distress." Jake looked up at the control booth and gave another one of those thumbs-up gestures. "Sure thing, Commander." "Let's see what this baby can do." The gravity plating hummed louder now, a deeper tone that suggested it was working harder than it had ever worked before. 2.6G. 2.7G. The lights flickered slightly as power was rerouted from systems that suddenly seemed much less important than satisfying scientific curiosity/military hubris. 2.8G. Jake's movements were slower now, not struggling, just more deliberate, like he was moving through water instead of air. He switched from mountain climbers to regular push-ups again, his form still textbook perfect. 2.9G. His heart rate is elevated to what we'd consider moderate exercise levels for his species, Dr. Morse reported, but still well within safe parameters. "This is remarkable. This is impossible. This is remarkably impossible." 3.0G. For the first time since entering the chamber, Jake stopped exercising. He stood up, rolled his shoulders, and took a few deep breaths. The control booth held its collective breath, various species utilizing various respiratory systems to achieve the same effect of anxious anticipation. And then Jake smiled. Not a grimace of effort. Not the rictus of someone pushing through pain. An actual, genuine smile. "Now we're talking," he said. "This is more like it. This feels like a real workout." Vrel's eye twitched. It was an involuntary muscular spasm that he would later claim was due to stress. But in the moment, felt more like his body's way of expressing incredulity when his brain couldn't find the words. "Pip," Vrel said very quietly, "get me everything we have on human physiology, and their planet, and their evolutionary history, and whatever deity they worship, because I want to lodge a formal complaint about their design specifications." "Right away, sir," Pip said, already pulling up files with two hands while the other two continued monitoring the chamber. Jake had started doing squats again, deep squats, proper form, in 3 times Earth gravity. In the control booth, a junior technician started crying. No one commented on it because, honestly, it seemed like a reasonable response. Commander Vrel's office was not designed for existential crises. It was designed for efficiency, with clean lines, organized data pads, and motivational posters featuring inspiring quotes about discipline and honor. There was one poster that showed a Saurian warrior standing atop a mountain with the caption, "Excellence is not an accident." Vrel was currently facing away from that poster because it felt like it was mocking him. Pip had transferred all the monitoring to a portable console and followed Vrel to his office, along with Dr. Morse and a xenobiology specialist named Trill, who'd been summoned from the research wing. They'd left Jake in the chamber at 3G with strict instructions to just keep doing whatever you're doing because no one knew what else to say at this point. "All right," Vrel said, settling behind his desk with the air of a man preparing for battle. "Show me what we're dealing with." Pip pulled up Earth's planetary specifications on the main display. Standard G-class star, 3rd planet, 1 natural satellite. Gravity is 1G, which is actually right in the middle of the habitable zone standard. Atmosphere is nitrogen-oxygen mix, 71% water coverage. On paper, it looks completely average, maybe even boring. "Nothing about that human is boring," Dr. Morse interjected. "I have been monitoring biological stress responses for 2 decades. That human's physiology is laughing at my instruments." Trill, who resembled a floating brain in a containment field and spoke with a voice that sounded like wind chimes having a conversation, chimed in. "May I suggest we examine their evolutionary history? Planetary specifications only tell part of the story." "Do it," Vrel commanded. Trill's containment field shimmered as they accessed the database. "Oh my. Oh dear. Oh, this is concerning." "What?" Vrel leaned forward. "What is it?" "Well, humans are classified as persistence hunters. Do you know what that means?" Pip's 4 hands made a collective gesture of ignorance. "They hunted things that persisted. No, it means they hunted by not stopping. Their prey was faster, stronger, had better natural weapons. So humans just followed them. For hours, sometimes days, they would track an animal until it literally collapsed from exhaustion, and then kill it while it was too tired to fight back. They turned stamina into a weapon." Vrel felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Continue." "Their planet has extreme temperature variations. -40 to +50 degrees Celsius depending on location and season. They have weather patterns that include frozen water falling from the sky, electrical storms that can level forests, and rotating columns of air that destroy entire settlements. They named these phenomena and then built civilizations anyway." "Surely that is not unique," Dr. Morse said. "Many planets have challenging weather." "True," Trill agreed. "But humans also have predators. Lots of predators. Let me pull up the list. There are animals called bears that can weigh 800 kilograms and run 50 kilometers per hour. There are reptiles called crocodiles with bite forces that can crush bone. There are big cats that can leap 12 meters and have retractable claws. There are tiny insects whose venom can kill in minutes. There are aquatic creatures with tentacles and beaks. There are even microscopic organisms that cause devastating diseases." The office was silent except for the hum of electronics and the distant sound of someone doing box jumps in 3G. "And the humans survived all of this?" Pip asked weakly. "Survived?" Trill's voice took on a tone that might have been amusement. "They thrived. They spread to every continent. They domesticated some of the predators. They invented medicine for the diseases. They built cities in deserts and tundras and jungles. And then, and this is the truly alarming part, they got bored." "Bored," Vrel repeated flatly. "Bored," Trill confirmed. "When they ran out of natural threats, they started fighting each other. For thousands of years, they developed increasingly sophisticated ways to fight each other. They wrote instruction manuals on fighting. They created martial arts, which are formalized fighting systems they practice for recreation. They have a concept called war, which is when large groups of humans fight other large groups of humans over resources or ideology, or sometimes just because they felt like it." Pip was making a high-pitched noise that might have been his species' version of a whimper. "That sounds like a death world. That sounds like what happens when evolution has too much coffee and not enough supervision." "Earth is classified as a Class 7 death world," Trill said, pulling up the official designation. "The classification system only goes to 10, and 9 and 10 are reserved for planets that are actively hostile to all known forms of life. Earth is one step below. You will definitely die immediately. Vrel pulled up a comparison chart. But their gravity is standard. 1G. That is not unusual. No, Dr. Morse said slowly, her tentacles moving in patterns that suggested she was thinking hard. But consider this. They evolved in 1G. Their entire physiology is optimized for that gravity. Their bone density, their muscle structure, their cardiovascular system. We see 1G as normal because it is the galactic average, but for humans, it is their baseline. The gravity they push against from birth. But that still doesn't explain the chamber, Vrel protested. 2.5G, 3G. He is performing at levels that should be impossible for a species evolved in standard gravity. Pip had been scrolling through more data, his 4 hands moving frantically. Commander, I found something. Human exercise physiology. They have entire scientific disciplines devoted to making themselves stronger. What do you mean making themselves stronger? That is what evolution is for. No, sir. I mean they deliberately stress their bodies to force adaptation. They have these places called gyms where they go to lift heavy objects repeatedly for no practical purpose except to increase muscle mass. They have training, programs. They push themselves to failure, let their bodies recover, and come back stronger. They call it progressive overload. Trill pulled up more files. They also have a concept called sports. Competitive physical activities they do for entertainment. They run marathons, which are 42-kilometer races. They do it voluntarily, for fun. There is one sport called rugby where they deliberately crash into each other at high speed while fighting over a ball. And another called boxing, Pip added, his voice getting higher, where they punch each other in the head until someone cannot continue. And people pay to watch this. They also climb mountains, Trill continued. Extremely tall mountains, in low-oxygen environments, with minimal equipment, and they plant flags at the top because apparently conquering geology is satisfying to them. Vrel was gripping his desk so hard his claws were leaving marks. So what you are telling me is that humans come from a death world, evolved, to outlast predators through sheer endurance, spent millennia fighting each other, and then invented recreational ways to make themselves even more physically capable. Yes, sir. All 3 responded in unison. And their baseline gravity, the gravity they consider normal and comfortable, is what we use as the galactic standard. Yes, sir. Which means every other species finds 1G to be comfortable, while humans find it to be the minimum acceptable resistance before they get bored and start adding weights to make things harder. That appears to be accurate. Yes, sir. Vrel stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the station. Somewhere on this station, in a cafeteria 3 decks down, Jake Thompson was probably doing pull-ups on a door frame or something equally ridiculous. Pull up the human's file, Vrel said quietly. His personal file. Pip complied. Jake Thompson's face appeared on the screen, along with his service record. Standard recruitment, middle of the pack. Scores on written exams. Excellent marks in physical training. There was a note from his intake interview. Vrel read it aloud. When asked why he wanted to join the Galactic Defense Corps, Cadet Thompson replied, "It seemed like it would be a good workout." Vrel turned around slowly. A good workout. He joined the military for exercise. There is a note here from his physical evaluation, Dr. Morse added, reading from her datapad. The examiner noted that Thompson's bone density was, quote, surprisingly high, suggesting extensive resistance training, and his cardiovascular capacity was rated as exceptional. The examiner recommended him for special operations consideration. Does it say what his training regimen was before joining? Vrel asked. Yes, actually. He lists his hobbies as rock climbing, trail running, and something called CrossFit, which appears to be a human exercise program designed to simulate various forms of physical hardship for entertainment purposes. Vrel walked back to his desk and sat down heavily. So we have taken a human who voluntarily made his own life physically harder for fun, brought him to a station with standard 1G gravity, which he considers relaxing, and then put him in a chamber designed to stress species to their absolute limits. And he asked if it was broken, Pip added helpfully. Thank you, Pip, I was there. Just making sure we are all on the same page, sir, Vrel's communicator chirped. He tapped it with more force than necessary. What? Commander, this is Chamber 7 monitoring. The human is asking if we have any water. He says he is getting thirsty and wants to stay hydrated. He wants to stay hydrated. In 3G, so he can continue exercising. Yes, sir. Also, he is asking if we can increase the gravity more because, and I quote, 3G is nice, but I am curious about 4. In Commander Vrel's office, something snapped. It might have been his patience. It might have been protocol. It might have been the last shred of his belief that the universe made sense. Get him water, Vrel said, and tell him we will see about 4G. Sir? Pip's eyes widened. Are you certain? No, Vrel said. But at this point, I need to know. For science, and maybe for personal closure, get the chamber ready for 4G. And pray to whatever gods will still listen to us after what we are about to do to physics. The thing about bad decisions is that they rarely announce themselves as bad decisions. They disguise themselves as curiosity, as scientific inquiry, as let's just see what happens. Commander Vrel was about to make a spectacularly bad decision, and he was doing it with the full awareness that his career obituary would probably include the phrase, in what can only be described as a catastrophic lapse in judgment. But at this point, he was pot-committed, as humans apparently said when describing situations where you'd already invested too much to back out gracefully. The engineering team had spent the last 20 minutes frantically rerouting power, reinforcing structural integrity fields, and muttering prayers in 6 different languages. Pip had assembled what he was calling the emergency shutdown protocols, which was a fancy way of saying ways to stop before we accidentally kill everyone or create a miniature black hole. Jake had been given water, which he'd consumed in about 4 seconds, crushed the container with one hand in a way that seemed unnecessarily dramatic, and then asked if they had any more of those protein bars. They did not. He'd seemed disappointed but understanding. All right, Vrel announced from the control booth, his voice carrying the weight of someone about to do something that definitely wasn't in the manual. Cadet Thompson, we are going to conduct an unofficial extended evaluation. This is not standard protocol. This is not sanctioned by Academy regulations. This is purely for research purposes. Cool, Jake's voice came through. The speakers. I signed a waiver when I joined up, right? We're good. You did sign a waiver. Yes. It covered approximately 73 potential causes of death or dismemberment. I am not certain this falls under any of them, but we will proceed anyway. That's the spirit. Commander. Vrel was starting to understand why humans had a reputation for being simultaneously terrifying and impossible to intimidate. They treated potentially fatal situations like minor inconveniences. Increasing to 3.2 G, Vrel announced. The gravity plating's hum deepened further, taking on a resonance that you could feel in your bones if you had bones, or in your containment field if you were Trill. Jake shifted his stance slightly, adjusting to the new pressure, but remained upright and alert. 3.5 G. Now Jake's breathing was definitely heavier. His movements had lost their casual quality and taken on focus. He wasn't struggling, exactly, but he was working. Actually, working, like someone who'd finally found a challenge worth his attention. How are you feeling, Cadet? Doctor, Morse asked, monitoring his vitals with an intensity that suggested she was watching history being made or a medical catastrophe developing. Good, Jake said, and he actually meant it. This is what I was looking for, real resistance. Can I try some exercises? You want to try exercises, Vrel repeated. In 3.5 times Earth gravity. Yeah. I mean, if we're doing this, we should do it properly, right? Vrel looked at Pip, who shrugged all 4 shoulders in a gesture of universal, why not? We've already gone this far. Proceed, Vrel said. Jake dropped into a squat. It was slower than his previous squats, his descent controlled and deliberate. At the bottom, he paused for a moment, and you could see the effort in the tension of his muscles, the set of his jaw. Then he drove back up, and his breath came out in an explosive exhale. 1, he counted. He did. Another squat, and another. 5 total before he stopped and stood upright, breathing hard but grinning. Okay, that's legitimate, he said, sounding pleased. That's actually hard. Can we go higher? In the control booth, Pip made a sound like a tea kettle that had been left on too long. Commander, we can push to 4G, maybe 4.5 if we're willing to risk several different kinds of structural failure, and one kind of existential failure where we question our life choices. His vitals are still stable, Doctor, Morse reported, her tentacles moving in patterns of amazement. Elevated, yes, significantly so, but stable. His cardiovascular system is compensating remarkably well. Trill's containment field pulsed thoughtfully. I believe we are witnessing the practical application of millions of years of Death World evolution combined with deliberate physical conditioning. This human has essentially turned himself into a gravity-resistance specialist without even knowing that was a thing one could specialize in. Increasing to 4.0 G, Vrel announced, and there was a manic edge to his voice now. The edge of a man who'd abandoned caution in favor of satisfying his burning need to understand just what the hell humans were capable of. 4G hit like the weight of expectations and disappointment combined. The air in Chamber 7 seemed to thicken, like reality itself was struggling under the pressure. Jake's knees bent slightly as he adjusted to the new load, his whole body tensing. "Okay," he said, his voice strained but still fundamentally cheerful. "Okay. Now we're definitely in the hard zone. This is great." "He thinks it is great," Pip said to no one in particular. 4 times Earth gravity. And he thinks it is great. I need to sit down. Can someone invent a chair that I can sit in while standing? Is that a thing? Jake started doing lunges. They were slow, controlled, and obviously required significant effort. Each step forward was a deliberate act of will, each return to standing a victory against physics. Sweat was visible on his forehead now, his breathing heavy and measured. 5 each leg, he announced after finishing. "Not bad. Feels like I'm doing weighted lunges back home. We've got this thing called a barbell, where you load metal plates onto a bar and carry it on your shoulders. This is similar, except the weight is everywhere instead of just on your shoulders. More balanced, honestly." Did he just compare 4G to his recreational exercise equipment? "Doctor," Morse asked. "Yes," Vrel said. "Yes, he did. Increased to 4.5 G. Sir, at 4.5 we're looking at a 15% chance of gravity plating failure, a 20% chance of structural field collapse, and a 100% chance that we're all going to regret this in approximately 3 minutes. Noted. Increased to 4.5 G. Pip made several religious gestures with multiple hands and began rerouting even more power. "For the record, if we die, I am haunting you." "Get in line," Vrel muttered. 4.5 G slammed into reality like a judge's gavel. The lights flickered. Someone's coffee mug in the control booth cracked under the stress vibrations. An alarm somewhere started making a sound that suggested it was having an existential crisis about whether it should be alarming or just giving up. Jake dropped to one knee. The control booth held its breath, across multiple respiratory systems and one containment field that didn't technically breathe but got the spirit of the moment. Then Jake stood back up. Slowly, deliberately, like someone deadlifting a personal record at a gym. His face was red with effort, his breathing hard and sharp, but he was standing. At 4.5 times Earth's gravity. Standing. "All right," Jake said, his voice tight with effort but still carrying that unmistakable tone of someone who was enjoying themselves. "This is legitimately hard. This is like max effort territory." "Can you move?" Vrel asked. Jake took a step forward. It was slow, each movement calculated, but he was moving. He raised his arms over his head in a stretch that would have made most species collapse. Then he lowered himself into a push-up position with control that suggested significant core strength and possibly insanity. He did one push-up. It took about 10 seconds from start to finish, and at the top he was breathing like he'd just sprinted a mile. But he'd done it. 1, he announced. "Not going for 50 this time. This is more like 1 rep max territory." "What?" Vrel said slowly. "Is 1 rep max?" "Oh. It's when you lift the absolute maximum weight you can handle for a single repetition. It's how you test your peak strength. We do it in training to track progress. You have terminology for this. You have systematic approaches to determining your maximum physical capacity." "Well, yeah," Jake said, pushing himself back to his feet with obvious effort. "How else would you know if you're getting stronger?" Trill's voice took on a contemplative tone. "Commander, I believe I have figured out why the human asked if the chamber was broken earlier. Please enlighten me." He was comparing it to his training expectations. In his mind, exercise equipment should challenge him, should push him to his limits. When we started at 1.5 or 2 G, it was not providing adequate resistance according to his conditioning. He thought it was malfunctioning because it was not hard enough. Vrel stared at Jake Thompson, standing in 4.5 G gravity, sweating and breathing hard but fundamentally intact, and felt the last pieces of his worldview rearrange themselves into a new and deeply concerning picture. "How?" Vrel asked quietly. "Did humans make it to space? Why would they ever want to leave a planet that keeps them naturally strong enough to mock galactic physical standards?" "Actually, sir," Pip said, pulling up a file, "according to their history, They left their planet primarily because it was not challenging enough. They wanted to explore, to see what else was out there, to find new frontiers. New frontiers, Vrel repeated. They conquered their death world and decided to look for more challenges. Yes, sir. We have invited them into the galactic community. Yes, sir. Where their standard gravity makes them naturally superior in physical capabilities to most species. That appears to be the case, yes, sir. Vrel looked at the data, at the readings, at Jake still standing in conditions that should have pulverized him, and made a decision. Reduced to 3G. Cadet Thompson, you will cool down at 3G for 5 minutes, then we are bringing you down gradually. This experiment is concluded. Aw, really? Jake actually sounded disappointed. We were just getting to the good part. The good part, Vrel said, was concluded when we did not accidentally create a singularity or collapse the chamber. Anything beyond that is excessive. As the gravity began to decrease, Jake immediately looked more comfortable. At 3G, he started doing light stretches, cooling down like this was just another day at his human gym. Hey, Commander, Jake called up. When can we do this again? Maybe add some equipment next time. I bet I could do some interesting stuff with resistance bands in high gravity. Vrel turned away from the window and faced his staff. I need to file a report, several reports, and possibly apply for a transfer to a desk position where I never have to encounter humans again. Sir, Doctor, Morse said gently, you should know that the Academy has 16 more human cadets scheduled to arrive next cycle. Commander Vrel put his head in his hands. It was going to be a long career. 3 days later, Commander Vrel sat in front of a committee of senior Academy officials, all of whom were reading his report with expressions that ranged from disbelief to horror to morbid fascination. Admiral Cross, a dignified Zentari whose crystalline form refracted light in patterns that usually conveyed wisdom, was reading the conclusion for the 3rd time. Let me make certain I understand this correctly, Admiral Cross said, their voice chiming like expensive glassware. You subjected a human cadet to 4.5 times Earth gravity, which is 4.5 times standard galactic gravity, and his primary complaint was that you stopped the session prematurely. That is accurate, Admiral, Vrel confirmed, his voice flat with resignation. And during this unsanctioned, unregulated, potentially catastrophic experiment, he performed calisthenics. Push-ups, squats, lunges, and 1 burpee before I stopped him. Vrel clarified. He wanted to do more burpees. I explained that I would resign my commission if he did more burpees, and he is not cybernetically enhanced, genetically modified, or in any way artificially augmented. Completely organic, Admiral. According to his intake file, he is what humans consider, quote, pretty average, maybe slightly above average if we're being generous. The committee members exchanged glances, or the equivalent thereof, for species without traditional eyes. A Krogthan general named Thorax, no relation to the previous record holder who now worked in accounting, leaned forward with interest. Commander Vrel, I have reviewed your recommendation, General Thorax rumbled, his voice like an avalanche having a conversation. You suggest that all human cadets be placed in a specialized training track. Can you elaborate on this recommendation? Vrel pulled up a chart on the main display. After the incident with Cadet Thompson, I conducted research into human physical capabilities and psychology. What I found was deeply troubling from a training standardization perspective. He clicked to the next slide, which showed comparison data. Humans have what they call a psychological phenomenon known as the Dunning-Kruger effect, where incompetent individuals overestimate their abilities. However, they also have an opposite phenomenon where highly competent individuals underestimate their abilities relative to the general population. Cadet Thompson genuinely believes he is average. Is he not average for a human? Admiral Cross asked. That is the problem, Admiral. According to human fitness standards, he is slightly above average, which means average humans are capable of approximately 60 to 70% of what we witnessed, and above average humans are capable of significantly more. The committee sat in silence as this information settled like a heavy weight, which, given what they were discussing, seemed appropriate. What do you propose? Admiral Cross asked finally. Vrel advanced to his next slide, titled Recommended Protocol Adjustments for Human Integration. His tone took on the practiced cadence of someone who had rehearsed this presentation many times, possibly while staring at his ceiling at 3 a.m, questioning his life choices. First, human cadets should be separated from standard training cohorts for physical conditioning. Not as punishment, but because their presence is catastrophic for cohort morale. Watching a human casually perform exercises that would hospitalize other species creates psychological trauma in the other cadets. Understandable. General Thorax agreed. Continue. Second, we need to recalibrate our entire physical training curriculum for humans. Our current program is designed to push cadets to 80% of their species' maximum capacity. For humans, this represents approximately 20% of their capacity, which they interpret as, quote, barely a warm-up. How do you propose we challenge them appropriately? Another committee member asked. Vrel's eye twitched slightly. This is where my recommendation becomes unusual. We need to install higher capacity gravity chambers, up to 6 or 7 G, and we need to hire human fitness consultants to design appropriate training programs, because our current understanding of exercise physiology is inadequate for their biology. You want to hire humans to train humans, Admiral Cross said slowly. With respect, Admiral, I want humans to train humans, because if we continue to train humans using our methods, we will continue to have humans asking if our equipment is broken, suggesting we try harder, and volunteering for experiments that violate safety protocols just because they are bored. Fair point, the Admiral conceded. Vrel advanced to the final slide, and his voice took on a tone of someone delivering news they knew would not be well received. Additionally, I recommend that Cadet Thompson be assigned as an assistant instructor for human physical training. The committee erupted. Questions and objections flew in multiple languages and communication methods. Vrel waited patiently for the chaos to subside, which took approximately 2 minutes. You want to promote the cadet who caused this situation? General Thorax asked incredulously. I want to contain the cadet who caused this situation, Vrel corrected. Right now, Cadet Thompson is in the general population. He uses the standard gym facilities. Do you know what he does in the standard gym facilities? I'm almost afraid to ask, Admiral Cross said. He has turned the pull-up bars into an informal competition venue. He hangs additional weight from his body using improvised methods and does pull-ups until other cadets stop to watch. Then he offers to teach them his techniques. 3 cadets have required medical attention after attempting to replicate his training methods. One of them was a Krogthan, Admiral, a species known for their physical prowess. The human convinced him to try something called a muscle-up, and the Krogthan pulled both shoulder articulations out of their sockets. Dear gods, someone muttered. If we make Thompson an instructor, we can supervise his influence. We can direct his enthusiasm toward productive outcomes, rather than emergency medical interventions. And critically, we can keep him away from equipment he might break through what he considers normal use. Admiral Cross's light patterns shifted into what might have been resignation. Very well, your recommendations are approved, Commander Vrel. You will oversee the implementation of this new human training track. Vrel had expected this, had dreaded this, had known, deep in his soul, that the universe had a sense of irony. Admiral, respectfully, I would prefer to remain in my current position with standard training cohorts. Denied. You have more experience with human physical capabilities than any other officer in the Academy. You caused this situation, Commander. Now you get to manage it. I did not cause humans, Admiral. No, but you pushed 1 to 4.5 G, and apparently enjoyed it enough to continue studying them. Consider this your reward. Dismissed. 1 week later, Commander Vrel stood in the newly designated Human Physical Training Facility, a converted cargo bay that had been outfitted with equipment rated for up to 8 G and reinforced enough to survive what the engineers were calling human enthusiasm events. Jake Thompson stood beside him, wearing an instructor's badge that looked far too official for someone who still occasionally ate protein bars during briefings. So, Jake said, looking around the facility with obvious approval, I've been thinking about the curriculum. We should start them at 2 G for warm-ups, work up to 4 G for main exercises, and maybe save 5 or 6 G for advanced training. What do you think? Vrel looked at the human who had, in the span of 2 weeks, turned his life upside down, gotten him assigned to the most unconventional position in Academy history, and was now asking for his input like they were colleagues planning a normal training program. I think, Vrel said carefully, that we should also install safety equipment. Extensive safety equipment. Good idea, Jake agreed. Safety first. Oh, and I've been talking to some of the other human cadets. They're really excited about having proper training facilities. A few of them mentioned they've been doing bodyweight exercises in their quarters because the standard gym was too easy. How many human cadets have been doing this? All 16 of them, Jake said cheerfully. Humans need regular exercise or we get weird and restless. It's kind of a biological imperative. Vrel imagined 16 humans, all of Jake's approximate capability, improvising high-intensity training in their quarters for weeks because they were bored. He imagined what would happen when they all had access to proper facilities. He imagined his future, stretching out before him, filled with humans casually destroying his understanding of physical limitations while asking if they could try harder things. Cadet Thompson, Vrel said, do you have any other suggestions for the facility? Jake's face lit up with enthusiasm that Vrel was learning to recognize as dangerous. Actually, yes. I was thinking we could install a 10G chamber, just a small one, for specialized training. 10G? Yeah, I mean, we won't use it often, just for peak performance testing. See what we're really capable of, push the boundaries, find our limits. Vrel looked at Jake Thompson, at his earnest expression, at his genuine excitement about finding his limits, and realized something profound. Humans didn't have limits, not in the way other species did. They had the boundaries they'd reached so far, and then they had the irresistible urge to push past those boundaries to see what was on the other side. I will submit a request for a 10G chamber, Vrel said, his voice carrying the tone of someone who had surrendered to the inevitable. Awesome, Jake said. This is going to be great, Commander. I think we're really going to revolutionize physical training standards. Yes, Vrel agreed. Revolutionize. That is certainly one word for what is about to happen. As Jake walked off to examine the new equipment, already planning routines that would probably violate several laws of physics, Vrel pulled out his datapad and began composing a message to his former academy instructor, the one who had told him that working at the training facility would be a stable, predictable career with no surprises. The message read simply, "You were wrong about everything. The humans have arrived. Send help, or alcohol, preferably both." He sent the message, looked around the facility that would soon be filled with humans, enthusiastically pushing themselves to their limits, and then asking what came after their limits, and accepted his fate. Somewhere in the station, a human was probably already doing pull-ups on something that wasn't designed for pull-ups, and another human was probably asking if the structural supports in their quarters could handle being used as climbing equipment, and another was probably calculating whether the station's rotation provided enough centrifugal force to make running the corridors more interesting. Commander Vrel didn't know whether to be terrified or impressed, so he settled for both, in equal measure, because when it came to humans, that seemed like the only reasonable response. The unofficial motto of humanity, he'd learned, wasn't about strength or courage or determination, though they had all those in abundance. No, the real human motto, the one they lived by whether they admitted it or not, was simpler and somehow more terrifying. If it doesn't nearly kill you, you're not trying hard enough. And now Vrel had to work with 16 of them, in a facility designed to let them try as hard as they wanted. He was definitely going to need that alcohol.